Okay guys, so in this video tutorial I'll be going through one of the questions, one of the tute questions, and I'll be demonstrating how you should go on about solving these kind of questions. So the question that we'll be looking at is question 9 of the tute questions. That's the first tutorial set, the question basically tells you to explain the change that happens to total revenue as price falls, and you're also given that demand is elastic. So before we answer this question, let me demonstrate quickly what elasticity is all about. So again, we draw our demand curve, price P on the y-axis, Q quantity on the x-axis. Now generally we said that the demand curve is going to be negatively sloped, so this is our demand curve D. And let's have a look at two other curves. So two other demand curves. One is inelastic, so it would have a steeper slope, the inelastic, and the other one is elastic, so it has a flatter slope in comparison. So you can see that as the blue one. So D elastic. So the blue one has a flatter curve in comparison to the red one. Red one is inelastic, the blue one is elastic. Why is this the case? And I'll demonstrate that through an example. So elasticity is defined as the change. So how much change is produced in terms of quantity if we were to change price. So what's the response of quantity when price changes? And the equation for that was the change in Q, percentage. So the percentage change, this symbol again, this is change, this means change, divided by change in P, the percentage change in price. So if we were to change the price by a bit, how much change is that gonna cause in terms of the quantity that is demanded? And this is basically what elasticity is about. So for the blue one, if I was to drop the price, say from 10 to 8, or maybe let's say 9, so just a $1 decrease. So if the price was to drop from 10 to 9, so at 10, the quantity that was demanded, let's say that was 2. So what happens to quantity that is demanded when price drops to 9? So it's only a small change, a $1 change from 10 to 9. Well, you can see that if I go across up until I hit the blue curve, and let's say this is 10, so a massive change happened to Q. So when small change happened to P, and price dropped by a bit, by $1, a massive change happened to Q. So Q changed from 2 to 10. And that's why the blue curve is elastic, which means that there's a huge response to Q when price drops down. Now, if we were to consider a similar drop, but in terms of the inelastic curve, so the red one, again, let's say this was 12, right? And the drop, let's say again it's $1, so 11. So at 12, quantity was maybe 1. At 11, it's now 2. So you can see that the small change in P led to a small change in Q, so not much of a difference in terms of the percentage changes, and that's why the red one is inelastic. So you have to compare the changes in P that happened when we when we had a look at the blue curve versus the small change that happened when we had a look at the inelastic curve, the red one. So that should extend to this point, and that should extend to that point. So you can see that these changes are really small. So even if we have a look at the black one, so the black curve over here, it's still inelastic in comparison to the blue one. So the blue one is the most elastic one. This is the most elastic curve. This is the second least elastic curve, black one, and then the most inelastic one is the red one. So small change in P leads only to a very small change in Q. That's the definition of inelastic. In terms of elastic, the blue one, a small change in P leads to a massive change in Q. So if we go back to the question, there's 3 points that you have to note. So price falls and demand is elastic. So the way you should answer this question is point number 1, total revenue, TR, is equal to price multiplied by Q, quantity. Demand is elastic, second point. So demand is elastic. What does that mean? That means that a small change in P, percentage of P, leads to a large change in percentage Q. So a small change in price, percentage wise, leads to a large change in Q, percentage wise. This is the definition of elastic demand. The third point to note is that demand, when we're talking about demand, it has a negative slope. And we saw that from the above example that I gave. So it's always a negative slope, an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So basically what that means is as the price decreases, quantity demanded increases. So there's always an inverse relationship. Vice versa, if price was to increase, quantity demanded would decrease. So now we're able to answer the question. So price falls, demand is elastic. We have all these 3 points. So total revenue is equal to price multiplied by quantity. And because of that, if the price drops by a small portion, what would happen to Q? Q is expected to increase by a massive portion. And that's because demand is elastic. This is the second point over here. So a small change in P. So a small change in P leads to a very massive change in Q. And because total revenue is equal to price multiplied by quantity, even though the price decreases by a bit, quantity increases by a massive portion. So overall, the increase in Q is expected to outweigh the decrease in P, and hence total revenue overall is expected to increase. All right, it's all about the proportions, right? So in terms of price, a small change in price, so it was only a very small change in price, and that led to a massive change in Q. This is the definition of an elastic demand. And because of these differences in proportions, total revenue overall is expected to increase.